Captain Elena Morgan stood on the blistering tarmac, still in her pilot's uniform, the weight of the heat and the situation pressing down on her like 1,000 tons. Sweat trickled down the back of her neck, but her face remained stoic, blank, distant, yet betraying the storm inside her. She could feel the eyes of the airport staff and passengers on her, their murmurs cutting through the silence like a blade. If she had to forestall them with a plush, she had to visibly twitch. Matthew fought back and pretended not to notice. Was that the police were closing in? She didn't look at them. She couldn't. Her thoughts were elsewhere. Somewhere dark, twisted, and endless. Police officer. Elena Morgan, you're under arrest for the assault of James Carter. You have the right to remain silent. She didn't even flinch at the words. She simply nodded, her lips pressed tightly together as the weight of her actions began to settle in her chest. She nodded. As the officers led Elena toward the waiting car, the flashbulbs erupted in the air. Reporters surged forward, their cameras clicking furiously, each one trying to capture the perfect shot. Headlines raced through her mind, none of them kind. One reporter caught her eye. A sharp, young man, barely older than 25, with a glint of eager curiosity in his eyes. Hey, he said, is it true to sabotage your co-pilot? Are the rumors about the affair with Sheikh Faisal true? Elena's heart raced. She wanted to scream, to lash out, but she stayed silent. No words could explain the chaos she had become. The crowd murmured again, their words barely audible over the clicks of cameras. Passerby 1, she's the one. The pilot who did that to her co-pilot. Elena's jaw tightened. Passerby 2, who knows what she was thinking, messing with someone like that? What kind of woman does that? The words cut deep, but she didn't let them show. The guilt, the shame, it all burned inside her. Too loud for anyone else to hear. James Carter's body lay in the sterile white room, hooked to machines that beeped with every breath he took. The once vibrant man who had shared her flights now seemed like a mere shadow, pale and frail, caught between life and death. The doctors exchanged glances, hushed and frantic as they pored over the test results. Dr. 1, these results, there's something strange here. This isn't just a simple infection. The virus is too advanced. Dr. 2, could it have been deliberate? The air in the room felt heavy. Elena had been close to him, closer than anyone had known. They'd shared so many late-night talks, the intimacy of trust growing between them. But now, the doctors were whispering things that Elena could never undo. Elena's eyes glinted in the dim light of the police vehicle, her mind racing as she was driven away. She could almost hear his voice, the warmth of James, the jokes they'd shared, the lightness in his laugh. Then she thought of Faisal, his touch, his words. How could she have fallen for it? The press and bystanders had long dispersed, but her mind was still tangled in the mess she'd made. As the police vehicle turned onto the main road, Elena muttered under her breath, her voice barely audible but unmistakable. Elena, he deserved it. They both did. The words hung in the air, more truth than confession. The question lingered in the air, unanswered and aching. What had driven Elena to this point? What twisted path had led her from a career woman, a respected pilot, to a figure of scandal and betrayal? And what of James? What had happened between them? Was there a part of her that hadn't been willing to forgive him for his flaws, his reckless gambling, his drug habits, that she had tried to overlook for so long? And Faisal? She thought of him now, the man who had once whispered sweet promises, who had played her like a puppet, manipulating her emotions, making her feel seen, understood, in a way no one else had. But now he was silent. Now she was alone. The last view of her was through the small window of the police car as it drove off into the distance, her face a mixture of guilt and something darker, something unresolved. Her plane, the one she had flown so many times, stood distant on the tarmac, an indifferent witness to the wreckage of her life, the life she had built, The life she had once believed was perfect was now lost to the flames of her own choices. Elena Morgan had always been a woman of exceptional skill. Few could rival her expertise in the cockpit, where precision and grace defined her every move. She was a captain now, the first female pilot at the prestigious airline, and her reputation soared almost as high as the planes she flew. Her colleagues admired her for her ambition, her composure, and her remarkable ability to handle the pressure of long-haul flights with ease. But behind the accolades and the polished professionalism, Elena felt a quiet ache deep within her. Her apartment felt more like a hotel room than a home, the walls echoing with the silence of her loneliness. The ghosts of a broken engagement haunted her thoughts. Memories of love, lost in the pursuit of her dreams. There were no partners waiting at home, no family to share in the triumphs or the struggles, just empty beds and fleeting connections. Elena, to herself as she stares out the window after landing. I wanted this, didn't I? I wanted to be someone, but I never realized it would cost me everything else. Each flight brought a sense of accomplishment, yet the moment the wheels hit the tarmac, Elena was left with the same hollow feeling. The hotel rooms blurred together. Sterile, impersonal spaces where she had no one to talk to, no one to hold her. Long hours between destinations, long stretches of silence, gave way to her inner turmoil. She tried to drown it out with work, with brief moments of distraction, but the isolation always crept back in. She thought of her ex-fiancé James and the promise they'd made to one another, but promises meant little when your career took precedence over everything else. Elena, sitting alone in a hotel bar, staring into her drink. If I could just go back, change things. But it's too late now. Sheikh Faisal al-Rashid was everything Elena wasn't. Where she was driven by a career that demanded sacrifice, Faisal commanded attention with his effortless charm. And wealth, a man whose very presence captivated a room. His reputation as a powerful businessman and influential figure in Dubai preceded him. Yet there was something more to him. A quiet, magnetic pull that Elena couldn't ignore. He was rumored to have a penchant for affairs, discreetly conducted under the radar. People whispered about his exploits, his charm cutting through the veils of secrecy like a blade. He could make anyone feel like they were the only person in the world. And Elena, with her emotional void, was no exception. Faisal, grinning, offering her a drink. You've flown all the way to Dubai, yet here I am, the first to offer you a drink. I must be a lucky man. To the public, Faisal was the epitome of devotion, an adoring husband and father, someone deeply rooted in his family's legacy. Yet beneath that image lay a darker truth. He had learned the art of compartmentalizing his life, carefully maintaining the facade of a family man, while secretly indulging in the thrill of control and manipulation. His family never knew of the affairs that came and went like shadows. His wife, oblivious to the nights he spent with other women, was nothing more than a trophy beside him. Elena, however, would soon learn that beneath the velvet glove of charm, Faisal's hand was made of iron. Faisal, on the phone, eyes narrowed, controlling. Make sure she's where I told you to be. If she doesn't show, you'll answer me. Understand? James Carter, Elena's co-pilot, was the quintessential gentleman, friendly, outgoing, the type of man who could charm anyone with his smile. Yet beneath the polished exterior lay a man with deep flaws, gambling, debts that piled higher with every passing month, and an insecurity that ate away at him whenever he was reminded of Elena's success. She was a woman in control, while he floundered in the shadows of his own life. His jealousy simmered beneath the surface, a constant companion as he fought to keep his demons at bay. Despite their friendship, his resentment festered, tainting everything he did, and Elena, unknowingly, was both his friend and a reminder of his failures. Jameis, laughing uneasily, glancing at Elena. Don't think you're the only one with a stake in this business. I've got my own plans. Just keep your head in the clouds, all right? Despite their professional rapport, A quiet tension had begun to develop between Elena and James. He hid his bitterness well, masking it with jokes and camaraderie, but it simmered beneath the surface. Every promotion Elena received was another reminder of his own stagnation. Every time she soared, it felt like he was being pulled down. But he'd never admit it, never let her see the cracks forming inside him. Not yet. James, in a low voice to himself, after Elena leaves. Always the star. Always the one they all look up to. I'm getting tired of being the one left behind. The luxurious layover in Dubai had been meant to be just that. Another stopover in the monotony of long flights. But as soon as she met Faisal in the gleaming, polished lobby of the hotel, Elena felt a jolt of something she hadn't felt in years. His words, his smile, his presence. It was as if the world had suddenly paused to make room for them. Faisal's attention was intoxicating. She hadn't realized how badly she'd craved being seen, truly seen by someone. And with him, it was impossible to resist. His touch, light and teasing, pulled her into a world she'd never known existed. Her face permanently gaped open, and it engrossed her. Faisal, whispering, his breath warm against her ear, "You're more beautiful than any woman I've known. Why hide it behind those uniformed walls?" What began as an innocent flirtation turned into something far more dangerous. Elena felt alive in a way she never had, intoxicated by the luxury, the affection and the passion Faisal offered. But soon, she began to notice the subtle shifts in him. The possessiveness, the constant need for reassurance. Faisal was never far, always watching her, always guiding her choices, with the delicate thread of manipulation. He had her now, and the power he had over her was absolute. His charm was no longer just an allure. It had become a quiet prison. Yet, Elena couldn't find it within herself to pull away. Faisal, gripping her arm, his voice low, "You're mine now, Elena. Don't forget that." The bright lights of the cockpit flickered above Elena as she flew through the cloud-heavy skies. She had once felt invincible, soaring above the world, but now the weight of her double life was dragging her down. In the quiet moments between flights, Elena often found herself trembling, not from the turbulence, but from the anxiety that clung to her every move. Faisal's whispered promises of passion were now suffocated by his possessiveness, a dangerous shadow that loomed over every conversation. She caught sight of the faint glow of her phone screen, messages from him. "You won't tell anyone, will you?" The question hung in the air like a threat she couldn't ignore. The guilt twisted in her chest. She had never imagined this would be her life, a secret affair with a man who could make her feel special one moment and frightened the next. She wasn't just keeping secrets from the world, but from herself, too. Elena, softly to herself, eyes clouded with fear. Why did I let it get this far? What happened to my control? Faisal's presence in Elena's life had become more suffocating with each passing day. It wasn't enough that he was always in her thoughts. Now he was always in her space. He began dictating her schedule, ensuring she was available when he wanted her, even if it meant rearranging flights and meetings. If she resisted, the cold threats came, not spoken out loud, but hidden in the lines of his messages, sharp and precise. Faisal was not a man used to hearing "oh." His eyes gleamed with an almost predatory satisfaction as he manipulated her every move, isolating her from the world she knew. Faisal, voice smooth, commanding. "You will make this work, Elena. Your colleagues are not concerned anymore. Focus on me, on us. That's all that matters now." Her friends, her colleagues, people she once trusted, had become distant. It wasn't just that Faisal controlled her time, but her mind, her will. He was the constant in her world now, and she was becoming dangerously aware of how much she needed him, or how much she feared him. James had always been good at noticing the small things, a glance, a hesitation, a moment of vulnerability. He thrived on them. And during a routine flight, His eyes caught something unsettling. Elena's phone. She had left it unlocked, something she rarely did, but her mind was elsewhere. James, being the opportunist he was, couldn't resist. A quick swipe of the screen and there it was. A string of messages from Faisal. Sweet words, promises of secrecy, but beneath them, an undeniable thread of control. "James," muttered Elena, "what the hell is this? Damn it, Elena, what have you gotten yourself into?" His fingers hovered over the phone, the weight of the discovery sinking in. Jealousy twisted in his gut. Her secret affair with a man like Faisal. James felt the jealousy simmer, a dangerous cocktail of resentment and desire. And in that moment, he knew how to use this information. He'd found his leverage. The plane hummed with the noise of engines, but in the cockpit, it was eerily quiet. James had watched Elena for weeks, her demeanor shifting as her affair with Faisal deepened. She was no longer the confident captain he once admired. She was unraveling, and now it was time for him to take advantage of her brokenness. He turned to her with a sharp edge in his voice, his earlier camaraderie gone. The facade of friendly banter was replaced with a chilling calm. "James." Elena's voice, threatening. "You know, Elena, there's something I can't ignore. I saw the messages. I know about Faisal. All of it." Elena's stomach churned, her breath catching in her throat. She tried to keep her composure, but panic clawed at her chest. She'd been caught, and now she was at James's mercy. "I'll keep quiet. But it'll cost you. We both know you've got the cash to handle this. I'll need a hefty payout, or your little secret gets exposed." Every nerve in Elena's body screamed to lash out, to refuse, but the pressure in her chest held her back. The weight of the situation settled in. She was trapped. Elena's world had become a constant, suffocating spiral. Faisal's control, James's demands. She felt like she was losing herself, each interaction stripping away the last fragments of her sanity. It wasn't just the affair, or the blackmail. It was everything. The isolation, the betrayal, the endless cycle of deceit. Her colleagues, once concerned with her professionalism, had begun to notice. Her eyes were tired, her smile forced. She could no longer maintain the mask of confidence. Colleague. To Elena. "You okay, Elena? You don't seem like yourself lately. Is everything all right?" But Elena couldn't answer. She couldn't admit the depths of her despair to anyone. Instead, she nodded, her throat tight with emotions she couldn't voice. The pressure began to take its toll on her work. Elena, once meticulous, now found herself forgetting routine procedures. She missed a step during the pre-fleet check, and her co-pilot noticed the slip. The reprimands were inevitable, but they only deepened her shame. As the plane soared through the air, her thoughts scattered. The cockpit no longer felt like her sanctuary. It felt like a cage, with eyes watching her every move. Superior, sternly, in a private conversation. "Elena, you need to pull yourself together. These mistakes are becoming a pattern. Are you sure you're fit to fly right now?" The words cut deeper than any reprimand should. She was losing control, and it terrified her. Late at night, when the silence of the hotel room felt unbearable, Elena found herself scrolling through forums and articles. Her once resolve was slipping, replaced by dark thoughts of revenge, of retribution. She read stories of women who had taken back control from those who'd wronged them, stories that spoke of power and consequence. Elena, whispering to herself, reading aloud, "If I could just find a way to make them both pay." She started researching manipulation tactics, legal loopholes, the perfect way to regain control, to break free from Faisal and James. But as the hours wore on, a sense of cold determination settled over her. She was no longer just a victim. She was planning her escape. Faisal's attitude changed after his family's growing disapproval. He had always been able to compartmentalize, but the pressure had mounted, and now Elena's presence had become a liability. During their last meeting, he dismissed her with a coldness that burned her soul. Faisal. Abruptly, his tone dismissive. This has to end, Elena. My family can't find out about you. We can't see each other anymore. The words hit her like a slap. After all the passion, the promises, the lies, they were nothing more than fleeting indulgences to him. She had been a mere distraction. The betrayal was complete. Elena's heart shattered. In the wake of Faisal's abandonment, James' demands grew more insistent. He now wanted more than just money. He wanted total control over Elena. With his debts piling higher and his patience wearing thin, his threats became more intense, his malice more pronounced. You know, Elena, I think you owe me more than just cash. I think I deserve something a little more permanent. You wouldn't want everything to come crashing down, would you? She asked, and her voice echoed with every word. What about the moving box with the broken bibby? The walls were closing in. She was trapped between two predators, and as her world spiraled into darkness, Elena knew she was running out of time. The silence of the hotel room pressed against Elena's chest as if it was trying to suffocate her. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. The betrayal had become unbearable. Faisal had discarded her like an old toy, and James had proven to be no better. His greed had trapped her in a nightmare she couldn't escape. Elena, whispering to herself, voice strained with rage. Why do they get to walk away unscathed? Faisal, James, they've ruined me. But I'll make them pay. The thoughts twisted like venom inside her. A dark seed of revenge had taken root, and it was growing, becoming a craving. Elena had always been rational, practical. But now the line between justice and vengeance blurred. She didn't just want them to regret what they'd done. No, she wanted them to feel the weight of their actions, to understand the damage they'd caused. She wanted to destroy them. Piece by piece. It was late when Elena stumbled upon the discovery. In her quest for information, she'd come across a report, James's past. An affair, yes, but it wasn't just any affair. The woman he'd been involved with had been diagnosed with HIV, a detail that made Elena's heart freeze. Elena, voice trembling with a mix of shock and realization, this changes everything. Her mind raced. James had been careless, playing with fire, and now it was her turn to turn the tables. She saw it now, a way to manipulate his own weaknesses against him. Anger coursed through her veins, but beneath it there was something more chilling. A plan taking shape. She'd found her weapon, and it was far more dangerous than anything she could have imagined. The days that followed were filled with a kind of frenzied calm. Elena spent her time researching, meticulously planning the perfect revenge. She needed precision, silence, and a way to make James' downfall look like nothing more than a tragic accident. She dug into medical articles, learning about the virus, how it could be transmitted, the subtle signs that would alert doctors, but remain undetected by the public eye. Elena studied James' routine, observing his every move. She knew how to tamper with his personal belongings without raising suspicion. He was careless, always leaving his bags unattended during layovers. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her mind consumed by the details. Every step of her plan was calculated, precise, and yet there was an unsettling thrill in her chest. She wasn't just taking control of her life anymore. She was taking control of his. Elena, muttering to herself, smirking, "He'll never see this coming." The flight had been uneventful, but James's voice echoed through the cockpit like a dark cloud. His demands had grown bolder in recent days, and this time he made no attempt to hide his malice. James, leaning toward Elena, his voice low and mocking, "You know, Elena, I'm beginning to think you don't fully appreciate the position I've put you in. I'm not going anywhere until I get what I want." Her hand clenched around the yoke, and the tension in her body was palpable. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, but she kept her composure. The anger that had simmered for weeks finally exploded in her mind. She'd had enough. No more games. Elena, calmly, with ice in her voice. "I know exactly what you want, James. But this time, you won't get it." The exchange hung between them like a sword, sharp and final. Elena had made up her mind. James had pushed her too far, and now there would be no turning back. Dubai was a blur of heat and bright lights as Elena stepped off the plane. The city felt foreign, an alien landscape where her plan could unfold with terrifying precision. She had a window of opportunity, just enough time to slip into James's hotel room unnoticed. Her pulse quickened as she approached the door, feeling the weight of the syringe in her bag. The small vial of HIV-tainted blood that she had carefully acquired would be the final blow to James' life. Her hand shook, but there was no turning back now. She slipped into the room, moving with practiced stealth. James' bag lay on the bed, carelessly unpacked. Elena knew this was her moment. She planted the syringe deep within the folds of his bag, making sure it would go undetected. Her breath caught in her throat. There was no going back now. Elena, whispering to herself, trembling felt longer than usual. Elena sat next to James, her mind racing with the thought of what she had just done. Her body was taut with the tension of knowing what would happen next. James, oblivious, chatted mindlessly about his plans and the money he still expected from her. He had no idea what was coming. The cockpit hummed with the routine sounds of flight, but Elena couldn't shake the unease that crept through her. Each moment stretched on, the silence between her and James, thick with unspoken words. James. Elena, unaware of the looming disaster. "You're quiet today, Elena. Something on your mind?" Her mind was anything but quiet. She was waiting, watching, calculating. Every minute brought her closer to the storm she had set in motion. Mid-slide, the first signs of James' decline became noticeable. He wiped his brow, his skin slick with sweat, his face pale. James. James. James, I feel so dizzy. My chest, it's tight. Elena remained calm, though her heart raced. The symptoms were unmistakable. Sweating, shortness of breath. She watched as his condition deteriorated rapidly, his movements sluggish, his eyes wide with panic. Elena, in a controlled tone, feigning concern. "James, are you all right? You look really unwell. We need to get you checked out." The cabin crew began to notice, and soon, whispers spread among them. Elena's mind raced. She had done it. This was her moment of victory. But as she watched James, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of doubt. Was this really justice? Or was it just another betrayal? By the time they landed, James could barely stand. The paramedics were waiting for him on the tarmac, rushing him to the hospital in a blur of flashing lights and concerned voices. Everything was fine. Elena kept her distance, careful to maintain the mask of a concerned colleague. Hours later, the hospital confirmed what Elena already knew. James had contracted HIV. The news spread quickly among the crew, with whispers circulating about the source of his infection. Elena's heart pounded in her chest as the truth slowly began to emerge, piece by piece. Cabin crew. Member. HYID. Did you hear, James? HIV. What do you think happened? The questions hung in the air, the suspicion growing. Elena had done it. Her revenge was complete. But as the whispers turned to rumors, a new feeling settled over her. Regret. Was this really justice? Or had she become what she had once feared? The sterile hum of the police station echoed as Detective Sarah Monroe scanned the files laid out before her. The case had piqued her curiosity from the start. James's sudden collapse, mid-schlap, followed by a rapid deterioration in his health, was far from ordinary. Detective Monroe, quietly to herself, something doesn't add up. Her fingers hovered over the report detailing his recent travel itinerary. Dubai. London. The pieces began to form a sinister picture. As she traced his path, her eyes landed on a crucial detail. Elena. She was listed as the last person to have had any contact with James before the flight. A quick check into her background revealed troubling information. Elena wasn't just another colleague. She had a motive, a hidden grudge. Her father, she seemed to love Elena. The pieces were fitting together, but there was something more. They needed to dig deeper. A few days later, the investigation had shifted into high gear. Surveillance footage from the hotel had been pulled, and it didn't take long for the pieces to click into place. Elena had been seen sneaking into James's hotel room, just as witnesses had reported. The digital trail was equally damning. Text between Elena and her friend discussing James's affair, along with a series of searches related to HIV, revealed her growing obsession with revenge. She had meticulously planned his downfall, and now it was coming to light. Detective Monroe, studying the evidence, voice cold. She's guilty. There's no doubt about it. The image of Elena's face on the screen, her expression calculated and cold, lingered in the detective's mind. The trail of digital footprints pointed to one undeniable conclusion. Elena had gone too far. The arrest was swift. Elena didn't expect it. How could she? She was still trying to convince herself that everything had gone as planned, that her revenge was justified. But when the officers arrived at her apartment, the truth shattered her illusion. "Officer," firmly, as they handcuff her, "Elena White, you're under arrest for assault and intentional harm." Her world collapsed in a flash. The cool metal of the handcuffs seemed to burn into her skin as the gravity of the situation hit her. Colleagues, friends, all of them had turned against her. The media was already on it, plastering her face across every news outlet. The woman who had once been seen as a victim was now the villain, the mastermind behind a horrific attack. "Elena, you don't understand. I had to do it. He'd ruined me." But her words fell on deaf ears. The damage had been done. The public didn't care for her reasons, only for the outcome. Elena had crossed the line from victim to villain, and now she had to face the consequences of her actions. Meanwhile, across the city, Sheikh Faisal sat in his lavish office, the walls adorned with portraits of power and success. He had heard about Elena's arrest, but it didn't faze him. If anything, it only solidified his position. He had known this day would come, but he had prepared for it. Faisal's influence in the media and his wealth made him untouchable. His silence in the wake of the scandal was calculated, a strategic move to keep his reputation untarnished. He had distanced himself from Elena months ago, making sure there were no direct ties to her actions. The press, hungry for a story, would eventually move on to something else. Faisal, to his assistant, coolly, "Let them talk. Elena's problems are hers alone. We have bigger things to focus on." His voice was calm, almost detached. He had used her once, and now he discarded her. In his world, Elena was nothing more than a pawn, and like all pawns, she had served her purpose. Now he moved on. James, battered but alive, quickly became the face of victimhood in the media. His diagnosis had shocked the public, and the whispers about the mysterious cause of his illness only fueled the frenzy. But it wasn't enough for James to just survive. He needed something more. James speaking to a reporter, his voice hoarse but filled with bitterness. "Elena White did this to me. She sabotaged my life. I trusted her and she betrayed me in the most unforgivable way." His words were deliberate, cutting deep into Elena's reputation. The media hung on every syllable, latching onto the scandal with hungry eyes. The moment James didn't just want his health back, he wanted her to pay, and he knew that her downfall would be his redemption. "Everyone needs to know what she did to me. She deserves to rot in prison." His public accusations spread like wildfire, painting Elena as the cold, calculating woman who had destroyed his life. The media turned against her with a ferocity that matched his own, and Elena's world crumbled further. Elena's world crumbled further. She was no longer just a criminal. She was now the symbol of betrayal and manipulation. Elena's life, once so carefully controlled and calculated, had spiraled into chaos. She thought she could manipulate the strings of fate, but instead, she found herself tangled in them. What started as a quiet act of revenge had become something much darker, something irreversible. She had always seen herself as a victim, of James, of Faisal, of the world that had humiliated her. But now, as she sat in a prison cell, the weight of her actions came crashing down. She had believed that revenge would bring justice, that it would restore the dignity she had lost, but what was she left with now? A hollow victory. Betrayal had never come without a price, and now Elena was paying it in full. No one had told her that revenge could consume you, that it could blur the line between right and wrong until all that was left was the wreckage of a life she once controlled. The worst part, she couldn't tell if it was the guilt of what she'd done to James, or the shame of what she'd become that hurt the most. It was too late now to turn back. What had begun as a desire to set the scales of justice right had evolved into an obsession. The nights spent plotting, researching, and planning had taken their toll on Elena. She'd convinced herself it was necessary. But as her hands trembled while carrying out her plan, she felt something else creeping in, a sense of dread that she couldn't shake. The vengeance that had seemed so sweet, so justified in her mind, was now a weight she could hardly bear. The act had been cold, calculated, and precise. But the aftermath? It was a haunting reminder of how quickly one could lose themselves in the pursuit of vengeance. Elena had wanted power. She had wanted control over the man who had hurt her, who had betrayed her trust. She wanted to show him, show everyone, that she was not someone to be trifled with. But in the end, it was her own soul that had been corrupted. Revenge had consumed her, leaving behind a shell of the woman she once was. Her life was a prison now, not built by bars, but by chains of guilt and regret. As the days stretched on in her solitary confinement, Elena had come to terms with one painful truth. She would never escape what she had done. The plans, the lies, the manipulation, it all seemed so distant now, like a life that belonged to someone else. The person who had once plotted her revenge with such fervor seemed unrecognizable. What was she left with now? A ruined reputation? A life behind bars? A deep, gnawing void that consumed her from the inside out? She often wondered if the punishment was enough. Had James truly suffered as she had hoped? Had her actions balanced the scales? Or had they simply created another layer of pain? Another endless cycle of misery? Maybe revenge wasn't the answer after all. Maybe justice didn't work the way she had believed. But now, there was nothing left to do but sit in the silence of her cell, the weight of her decisions hanging heavy in the air. Her fate was sealed, and she would carry the consequences of her choices until the very end.